The notification didn't arrive with a thunderclap or a dramatic flourish. It was just a soft, digital chime, a polite ping that cut through the silence of my office at precisely 9:14 on a Tuesday morning in mid-November. On my monitor, a small rectangular box appeared in the corner of the screen. The subject line read, Operational Strategy Review. The location was the Executive Suite, Conference Room A. The attendees were listed as Julian Thorne, our Chief Executive Officer, Beatrice Vance, the Director of Human Capital, and me. I sat there, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, and watched the cursor blink in my unfinished spreadsheet. I didn't need to open the invite to know what it meant. In my 15 years at Vanguard Logistics, a top-tier distributor of specialized pharmaceuticals, I had seen this specific arrangement of people and places exactly 12 times. It was the corporate version of a black site rendition. No one ever went into Conference Room A with Beatrice and Julian and came out with a job. My name is Alina Vance. I'm 42 years old, and for a decade and a half, I have been the ghost in the machine. My formal title is Lead Regulatory Compliance Auditor. It's the kind of job title that acts as a conversation killer at dinner parties. People hear compliance, and their eyes immediately glaze over, imagining a life spent checking boxes and filing dry reports in windowless rooms. And for a long time, that's exactly what it was. I was the person who made sure the temperature in the cold storage vaults didn't fluctuate by more than half a degree. I was the person who verified that the drivers transporting Schedule HU narcotics had their background checks updated. I was the one who ensured that every vial of life-saving medicine leaving our docks was exactly what the label said it was. It's unglamorous, repetitive, and utterly vital. If I do my job perfectly, nothing happens. No one gets sick, no licenses are revoked, and the company stays out of the headlines. It's a career built on the absence of catastrophe. But in the modern corporate world, nothing happening is often viewed as a lack of innovation or disruption. I didn't feel the urge to cry, and I didn't feel the urge to scream. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity. I took a slow sip of my tea, it had gone stone cold, and I looked at the piles of folders on my desk. For the last 6 months, I had been watching the walls close in. It wasn't a sudden shift, it was a slow erosion. It started when Julian Thorne was hired to streamline our operations. He came from the tech sector, a world where moving fast and breaking things was a badge of honor. But in the world of pharmaceutical distribution, breaking things usually results in a body count or a federal prison sentence. Julian viewed my department as a bottleneck. He saw my audits as friction. To him, the federal regulations were suggestions, obstacles meant to be navigated around rather than followed. And for 6 months, I had been the only person standing in his way. I looked at the clock, 9:16 a.m. The meeting was at Humphrey Ojed. I had 44 minutes left of my career. I didn't spend those minutes clearing out my desk or writing a scathing resignation letter. I spent them doing what I had always done, the work. I finished the audit on the latest shipment of insulin. I double-checked the seals on the refrigerated units in Warehouse 4. And then, I opened a hidden folder on my personal encrypted drive, the one I had been building since Julian first suggested we relax our documentation standards. I hit sync one last time, ensuring that every email, every recorded conversation, and every falsified log I had uncovered was safely tucked away in the cloud, far beyond the reach of the company's IT department. Then, I stood up, smoothed my blazer, and began the long walk to the executive suite. The hallway was unusually quiet. My colleagues, people I had shared coffee with for years, suddenly found their shoes very interesting as I passed. The office grapevine at Vanguard was faster than any fiber optic cable. Everyone knew the Gray Lady of Compliance was headed to the chopping block. I was about 30 feet from the heavy mahogany doors of Conference A when I heard a commotion near the main lobby. It wasn't the usual sound of a delivery or a guest checking in. It was the sound of heavy, rhythmic footsteps and the sharp, authoritative voice of someone who wasn't used to being told no. I paused, turning my head toward the glass partition of the reception area. 3 individuals were moving through the security gate. They weren't wearing the business, casual attire of our vendors. They were in dark, tailored suits, and the woman in the lead was holding a leather-bound badge wallet open for our receptionist to see. I recognized the seal on the badge instantly. It wasn't the local police, and it wasn't a state inspector. It was the Department of Justice, specifically the Office of Inspector General for Health and Human Services. The receptionist, a young woman named Maya, who had only been with us for 3 months, looked like she was about to faint. She fumbled for the intercom, her voice trembling as it echoed through the hallway speakers. "Mr. Thorne." "Julian. There are federal agents here. They're demanding to see the compliance records. They say they have a warrant for the digital servers." I stood perfectly still. My heart, which had been a dull thud in my chest, suddenly spiked. This wasn't a coincidence. This was the storm I had been tracking for months, finally making landfall. The lead agent, a woman with iron, gray hair and eyes that looked like they'd cut through steel, locked eyes with me through the glass. She didn't know who I was, but she saw the badge hanging around my neck. Lead Regulatory Compliance Auditor. She marched toward me, her team following in a tight formation. "Elena Vance," she asked. Her voice was a low, resonant alto. "Yes," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm Elena. I'm Special Agent Sarah Jenkins. We're here to execute a search and seizure warrant regarding Vanguard's filings with the DEA and the FDA over the last 2 quarters. We've been informed that there are significant discrepancies in your controlled substance logs." Behind me, the door to conference room A flew open. Julian Thorne stepped out, his face a mask of practiced corporate concern. Beatrice Vance followed him, looking like she had just seen a ghost. "Agent Jenkins, surely there's been some mistake?" Julian said, his voice smooth and dripping with artificial warmth. "We were just about to have a meeting with Miss Vance to discuss these very issues. We take compliance very seriously here. If you'll just step into my office, I'm sure we can clear this up without making a scene." Agent Jenkins didn't even look at him. She kept her eyes on me. "Ms. Vance, as the lead auditor, you are the custodian of these records. We need your immediate cooperation. Are the logs we're looking for in your office? Or have they been moved to the central server?" I looked at Julian. For the first time in 6 months, he looked small. The bravado, the talk of disruption and market speed, had evaporated, leaving behind a man who was clearly terrified. He gave me a look, a silent, desperate plea. He wanted me to lie. He wanted me to tell the agents that the records were undergoing a routine update, or that there had been a software glitch. I thought about the insulin shipment from July. I thought about the 3,000 vials of a high-risk medication that had been stored in a warehouse with a broken cooling system for 48 hours. Julian had told me to ignore the alarm and keep the product moving. He told me that a few degrees didn't matter and that the company couldn't afford $1 million write-off. I had documented the temperature excursion. I had flagged the batch for destruction. And then, I had watched as Marcus Reed, my direct supervisor and Julian's hand-picked lieutenant, had gone into the system and manually overridden my report, certifying the product as safe and shipping it out to hospitals across the country. "The logs you're looking for don't exist in the company's official database anymore," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence of the hallway. Julian's face went from pale to ashen. "Elena, think carefully about what you're saying," he hissed. I ignored him. I looked directly at Agent Jenkins. The official database was altered 4 months ago. The real records, the original temperature logs, the unedited security footage, and the internal memos regarding the shipment of compromised pharmaceuticals are on a private, encrypted server. I have the access keys, and I have a physical backup in my bag. Beatrice Vance gasped. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. "Ms. Vance," Agent Jenkins said, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "I think we should find a quiet place to talk. Somewhere private. Conference room A is available," I said, gesturing toward the room where I was supposed to be fired. I believe the CEO and the HR director were just leaving. The next 6 hours were a blur of digital forensics and intense questioning. I sat in that small, windowless room, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being scrutinized. I was the one holding the map. I showed the agents everything. I showed them the shadow ledger, a secondary set of books that Julian and Marcus had used to track the real movement of products, while the official filings showed a sanitized, perfect version of reality. I showed them the emails where I had been threatened with career realignment if I didn't stop asking questions about the missing narcotics in Warehouse 2. I showed them the photos I had taken with my phone of the mold growing in the sterile packing area, photos that had been taken after I was told the area had been professionally remediated. As I spoke, the gravity of the situation began to settle over the building. I could hear the sounds of other agents moving through the offices, boxing up files and mirroring hard drives. I saw Marcus Reed being led out in handcuffs at 20:00 p.m., his head hung low, refusing to look at any of the employees who watched him go. Agent Jenkins sat across from me, a laptop open between us. She had been typing for hours, her expression unreadable. Finally, she closed the screen and looked at me. "You realize what you've done, don't you, Elena?" she asked. "I did my job," I replied. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You did more than your job. Most people in your position would have either quit or looked the other way. You stayed, and you built a case. You've given us enough evidence to indict not just Thorne and Reed, but the entire board of directors if we can prove they were complicit." "I don't care about the board," I said. "I just care about the patients who received that compromised insulin. Do you know where it went?" "We've already sent out the recall notices," Jenkins assured me. "Thanks to your timestamps, we were able to track every single vial. Most of it is still in hospital pharmacies. We caught it in time." A wave of relief washed over me, so strong it made my hands shake. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For months, I had been carrying the weight of those vials, the fear that someone, somewhere, was injecting a useless or dangerous substance because I hadn't been loud enough. "What happens to me now?" I asked. "I assume I'm still out of a job. Julian might be in handcuffs, but the company is going to burn to the ground, isn't it? Vanguard is a vital part of the supply chain." Jenkins said, "The government doesn't want it to fold, we want it to be clean. There will be a massive fine, a federal monitor, and a complete overhaul of the leadership. As for you, you're a whistleblower, Elena. You're protected by law. But more than that, you're the only person who knows where all the bodies are buried." The fallout was even more explosive than I had anticipated. By the end of the week, Julian Thorne had been formally charged with conspiracy to distribute adulterated drugs and wire fraud. Beatrice Vance had retired for health reasons, though everyone knew she was cooperating with the feds to avoid an indictment. The board of directors had been gutted, with the chairman resigning in disgrace. The office was a graveyard. Half the staff had been laid off as the company froze its operations to undergo a total audit. The remaining employees moved like ghosts, terrified of their own shadows. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office to find a man I didn't recognize sitting in Julian's old office. He was older, with a kind face and the weary look of a man who had spent his life fixing broken things. His name was Arthur Sterling, the court-appointed interim CEO. Vance," he said, standing up as I entered. "Thank you for coming in. I imagine the last few days have been traumatic." "I've had better weeks," I admitted. He gestured for me to sit. "I've spent the weekend reading your reports. Not the ones you filed with the company, but the ones you gave to Agent Jenkins. They are remarkable. Your attention to detail is staggering, but what struck me most the date of your first warning email to the board." "October of last year," I said. "Exactly. You warned them a full year before the DOJ arrived, and they ignored you." Sterling leaned forward. "I'm here to rebuild this company from the studs up. I don't want disruption. I don't want market speed. I want integrity. I want to know that when a doctor opens a box from Vanguard, they don't have to think twice about what's inside." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was an employment contract. "I'm appointing you Chief Compliance Officer," he said. "You'll report directly to me in the new board. You'll have a team of 12, a budget that cannot be touched by the operations department, and total veto power over any shipment that doesn't meet your standards. If you say no, the trucks don't move. Period." I looked at the contract. The salary was more than I had ever dreamed of, but that wasn't what caught my eye. It was the clause at the bottom: "The CCO shall have final authority on all matters of safety and regulatory adherence, superseding the CEO." "Why me?" I asked. "I'm the one who brought the feds in. Most companies would see me as a traitor. Most companies are run by people like Julian Thorne." Sterling said, "I'm not interested in those companies. I'm interested in the one that survives. And Vanguard only survives if the world believes we've changed. You are that change, Elena." I took the job. The next year was the hardest of my life. Rebuilding a culture of integrity is much more difficult than maintaining one. I had to fire people I liked because they had been complicit in Julian's shortcuts. I had to stand my ground against angry sales managers who lost millions in commissions because I wouldn't let them ship product with a 3-day gap in its temperature logs. I became the most hated person in the company and the most respected. One afternoon, about 14 months after the raid, I received a letter in the mail. It wasn't a legal document or a corporate memo. It was a simple handwritten note on plain stationery. "Dear Ms. Vance," it began, "you don't know me, but my daughter is type 1 diabetic. Last July, she received a batch of insulin that was part of a recall. The doctor told us that if that insulin had been used, it wouldn't have worked and she could have gone into ketoacidosis. I read about the investigation in the news. I read about the woman who spoke up. I just wanted to say thank you for doing your job. You saved my daughter's life." I sat at my desk, the heavy mahogany desk that used to belong to Julian Thorne, and I cried. I didn't cry for the stress, or the long hours, or the lawsuits. I cried because for 15 years, I had been a ghost, and for the first time, I realized that even ghosts can leave a footprint. The final trial of Julian Thorne took place in a cold, sterile courtroom in the city. I was the star witness. I sat on that stand for 3 days, answering questions with the same meticulous precision I used in my audits. Julian sat at the defense table, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame, his eyes avoiding mine. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, there were no cheers, just a profound sense of closure. As I walked out of the courthouse, Agent Jenkins was waiting for me on the steps. She looked the same, though perhaps a bit more tired. "You did good, Elena," she said, handing me a coffee. "Is it over?" "For Julian, yes. For you, I think it's just beginning." She looked out at the city skyline. "There are a lot of Vanguards out there, Elena. A lot of companies that think the rules don't apply to them. They need people like you." "I'm happy where I am," I said. "We just passed our first independent audit with a perfect score. No friction." She smiled. "I heard. You've become something of a legend in the compliance world, you know. The woman who wouldn't blink." I walked back to my car, the crisp autumn air filling my lungs. I thought about that Wednesday morning in October, the ping of the calendar notification, and the 41-year-old woman who thought her life was over. I wasn't that woman anymore. I was no longer the person nobody thought about. I was the person who made sure the world kept turning, one checked box at a time. The work continued. Not because it was glamorous, and not because it was easy, but because it was right. And in a world of disruption and chaos, doing the right thing is the most revolutionary act of all. As the years passed, the story of Vanguard Logistics became a case study in business schools. It wasn't taught as a story of failure, but as a story of redemption. I was often invited to speak at universities to tell the next generation of executives that ethics aren't a luxury, they are the foundation. I remember one student, a young man with bright eyes and a notebook full of questions, who asked me after a lecture, "How did you know when to stop being a team player and start being a whistleblower? Weren't you afraid of losing everything?" I looked at him and thought about the cold tea, the gray hallways, and the silent colleagues. "I didn't lose everything," I told him. "I was losing myself. Every time I looked the other way, every time I signed a report I knew was wrong, I was erasing a piece of who I was." Fear is a powerful thing, but it's nothing compared to the weight of a guilty conscience. I didn't speak up because I was brave. I spoke up because I wanted to be able to look in the mirror again. He nodded, writing that down. I headed back to the office. There was an audit waiting for me, a shipment of rare pediatric oncology drugs that required a very specific humidity level during transport. It was tedious work. It was unglamorous. It was the most important thing I would do all day. And as I sat down at my desk and opened the first file, I heard a familiar sound. A soft, digital ping. I smiled. It was just a reminder for a team lunch. The ghost was finally home. The sun began to set over the city, casting long, amber shadows across my office floor. My team had already headed home for the day, their laughter echoing briefly in the hallway before the heavy doors clicked shut. I stayed behind for a moment, enjoying the stillness. Vanguard was no longer the company it had been. We were smaller, more focused, and infinitely more transparent. We had survived the fines, the lawsuits, and the scandal, emerging as a beacon of what was passion, prioritized human lives, over quarterly earnings. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from my brother, asking if I was coming over for Sunday dinner. I typed back a quick yes, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the office heating system. For years, I had been so consumed by the shadow ledger and the fear of discovery that I had let my personal life wither. Now, the shadows were gone. I stood up and grabbed my coat. As I reached for the light switch, my gaze fell on a small framed photo on my bookshelf. It wasn't a picture of my family or a vacation. It was a photo of a simple, nondescript warehouse thermometer, the one I had used to prove the temperature excursion in Warehouse 4. It was a reminder that the smallest things often carry the greatest weight. I flipped the switch, plunging the office into darkness, and walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The records were straight, the logs were accurate, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I was going. The city lights were bright as I pulled out of the parking lot. I blended into the flow of traffic, just another person headed home after a long day of work. But as I drove, I felt a quiet, persistent hum of satisfaction. The world is full of people who want to be the hero of the story, the visionary, the disruptor, the star. But the world is kept safe by the people who are willing to be the villains in the eyes of the corrupt. It's kept safe by the auditors, the inspectors, the box checkers. It's kept safe by the people who refuse to move at market speed when safety is on the line. I am Elena Vance. I am a compliance officer, and I am exactly where I am supposed to be. The road ahead was clear, the horizon was wide, and the air was cold and clean. I rolled down the window, letting the wind whip through my hair, and I started to whistle. It was a Cindy tune, rhythmic and reliable. Just like the work. Just like me. In the months that followed, the industry began to shift. Other distributors, seeing the Vanguard model, started implementing their own independent compliance boards. They realized that the cost of an audit was a pittance compared to the cost of a federal investigation. I was asked to consult for the FDA on new guidelines for digital log security, ensuring that what happened at my company could never be repeated elsewhere. I met Arthur Sterling for coffee a few weeks before he was set to step down as interim CEO. He looked younger than he had when we first met. "You've done it, Elena," he said, stirring his espresso. "The new CDO starts on Monday. She's a former regulator from the UK. You're gonna like her." "I hope so," I said, "because if I don't, she's gonna have a very difficult first week." Arthur laughed. "I have no doubt. You know, I've worked in this industry for 40 years. I've seen a lot of people come and go. Most of them are remembered for how much money they made or how many companies they acquired. But you'll be remembered for how many people you didn't let get hurt." "That's a good legacy," I said. "It's the only one that matters," he replied. As I walked away from the cafe, I thought about the word compliance. It comes from the Latin word complere, meaning to fill up or to complete. For a long time, I thought compliance was about following the rules. But I realized then that it was actually about making things whole. It was about ensuring that the promise made by a pharmaceutical company, the promise of healing, was actually kept. I reached my car and saw a small sticker on the bumper of the vehicle parked next to me. It was a simple heart with a pulse line running through it. A symbol of life. I took a deep breath, the scent of rain and pavement filling the air. My job wasn't just about spreadsheets and sensors. It was about that pulse. It was about every heartbeat that continued because a shipment was handled correctly, because a log wasn't falsified, because someone didn't break things just to move faster. I started the engine and drove toward home. The sun had finally set, and the stars were beginning to peek through the city's glow. I was 43 now. I had a long career ahead of me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the future. I didn't need to see the weather to know the storm had passed. I had built a house that could withstand the wind. I pulled into my driveway, the headlights reflecting off the windows of my quiet, comfortable home. I stepped out of the car, the silence of the neighborhood a stark contrast to the chaos of the last 2 years. I walked up to my front door, keyed the lock, and stepped inside. "I'm home," I whispered to the empty hallway. And for the first time, it truly felt like I was. The end of the journey wasn't a courtroom victory or a corporate promotion. It was the ability to sit in a quiet room at the end of a long day and know that I had done exactly what I was meant to do. I sat on my sofa, the shadows of the trees dancing on the wall. I didn't turn on the TV or open my laptop. I just sat there, breathing in the stillness. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., I would walk back into Vanguard. I would open my emails, I would check the logs, and I would look for the things that weren't there. I would be the bottleneck, I would be the friction. I would be the guardian of the gate, and I wouldn't have it any other way. The world needs its ghosts. It needs its auditors. It needs the people who stay awake so everyone else can sleep. I am one of those people. And I am proud. The night was deep, the stars were bright, and the world was, for the moment, in total compliance. I closed my eyes and finally truly slept,